31-28 the final score here. We've got post-game reaction right now at Frogs Today and FrogsToday.com. Overtime loss for the Horned Frogs in the Big 12 Championship to Kansas State, obviously. Now the attention turns to what happens next. But first, we've got a little post-mortem we have to do here for the Frogs. Heroic effort by Max Duggan. If you were looking for a Heisman Trophy moment, you got it in that final drive to tie it, to send it into overtime. That was all Max. He ends up running for 95 yards on that drive to lead him to that tie score after the two-point conversion pass to Jared Wiley. Let's get some reaction, though, on this game. And for that, standing by with Coach David Bowden is Maggie Hale. Maggie?
Thanks, Brian, and to really just understand kind of the emotions that are felt, but with this loss for TCU, you have to go back to the very beginning of the game, and TCU got down kind of like they normally do. What were you seeing from this team that maybe kind of put some confidence into you?
Yeah, I think, not only just the beginning of this game, but go back to, it's all about Max Duggan, really, and his grittiness, and maybe one of the grittiest, toughest players I've ever been around and watched play this game. And you saw him in the post-game press conference, his emotion, to me, not only going back to the beginning of the game, but to begin back to the beginning of his career. And just, all that he's been through, both on and off the field. I just think this, that it was a culmination of all that emotion in this one. But again, it was a gritty effort. It didn't go their way. They played in a lot of close ones. Most of the time, as we know, they've come out on the right end of these things. But, you play enough close games, this is bound to happen.
Absolutely. And we got to also see a lot from Quentin Johnston and D. Winters, who were definitely game changers at some points. But we even saw maybe Quentin Johnston, Sonny Dykes called it rustiness. What do you need to see from the offense and the defense wherever they go?
Yeah, I think when you talk in terms of Quentin Johnston, I don't care how talented of a player you are, how good of a player you are, and we know he's elite. If you don't have the reps in practice, the very best players, you're going to have some rustiness. And, and then, you turn the ball over there in a critical play there, and that hurt them, obviously. But he's a guy that's going to bounce back. He's super talented, great player, and now he'll get those reps under his belt as we head, through this month and find out where they play.
And they talked a lot about kind of shaking it off, even just on the bus ride back home. As a coach, what do you tell your players?
Well, I think, Coach Sonny Dykes said it best when he just said he continues to be proud of this football team, and he has every right to be. And so it's important to let them know that despite, the outcome, he's proud of their process and their process on a daily basis and continue today for them to fight. So he's proud of them. And then also that, hey, look, we have some things to clean up. They can still end up here in the playoff. And that gives them an opportunity to coach those things up and go ahead and make on this stretch run here.
And we touched on it a little bit earlier, but Max had a ton of emotion flowing in the post-game press conference. And we saw it through his voice and what he was kind of saying about himself and the team, obviously speaking very highly of his team, but really being down on himself, which is something that we didn't see the other players or Sonny Dykes talked about him. So we know that obviously he's got that personality. He's the type of guy that's going to bounce back, and he's already talking about it. Brian?
Thank you, Maggie. All right, now let's talk big picture here for this one. The Horned Frogs still, obviously, with postseason hopes. That college football playoff announcement will come at 11 o'clock tomorrow. That's when we know the fate of the Horned Frogs. Let's get some perspective not only after this game, but also national perspective now as to the Frogs' possibilities. These two guys have been talking to folks all around the country to figure out, is TCU in or are they out? Here's Jeff Wilson with Jamie Plunkett. Jamie.
You're absolutely right, Brian. Now the debate begins with the loss here for TCU in the Big 12 championship. There's going to be a lot of conversation about whether they should or should not be included in the college football playoff. Realistically, Jeff, this is a team that's 12-1, deserving, I believe, of a playoff berth. But as you kind of process this game today and look at the college football landscape, how do you feel about TCU's chances of being included in the Final Four?
Well, I think they get a lot of help because USC lost Friday night in the Big 12 or the Pac-12 championship game. That takes one really probably deserving team out of the picture. That leaves Ohio State and that leaves Alabama. And look, Alabama has lost 2 games. I know that they're Alabama. They're talented. They're probably the most talented team in the country as far as just pure individual talent. But look, you lost twice. You had your chance. Ohio State, they lost to what is probably going to be the number 2 team in the poll. Do they deserve to be in? Maybe. I just. But do they deserve to be ahead of TCU? I would say no. But we got to pull ourselves back from TCU for a minute. We're Frogs today, but we got to be kind of get a national pulse here. And there are a lot of people who are on TCU's side. There are a lot of people who think, the teams that play in the championship games, especially the undefeated ones, should not be punished for having to play the extra game while these other people sit at home on their butts and don't have to do anything. And TCU didn't get blown off the field. TCU had chances to win the game and be 13-0. Ultimately, they didn't. But the way they lost, I think the way Max Duggan performed, I think those are things that are very strongly in TCU's favor. But it's going to be a pretty grueling 18 hours.
And you're right. We did see a lot of this national media attention on this game following this loss for TCU. People coming out in support. Emmanuel Acho, ESPN, says he believes TCU should be in. Stuart Mandel, who is the editor-in-chief for The Athletic, says TCU should be in. I was talking to Richard Johnson of Sports Illustrated right after the game. He says TCU's a lock for the Final Four as well. Obviously, we'll see Sunday morning at 11 o'clock, but really just Frog fans are going to be waiting with bated breath. They have the trauma of 2014 of not getting in despite only being a one-loss team, and it would be just so wholly ironic, Jeff, if after the creation of a college football or a Big 12 championship game that loss would keep the Frogs out again.
Yeah, and then it would be Ohio State would be one of the teams that gets in, as was the case back then. So, yeah, there's a lot of it could be a lot of horror stories tomorrow. But ultimately, and Sonny Dykes, I thought it was kind of funny. He said, "I have a lot of faith in the committee." Well, he's the only one in purple, I think, that has that. And but he was cognizant of what's happened in the past, and you got to be full of hope at this point. I mean, you had your team, if you're Sonny Dykes, had a chance to eliminate all the worry just by winning the game, just by running a quarterback sneak on the goal line, just by punching it in 2 feet, and really making Kansas State have to score that touchdown in overtime. And who knows what happens if they do it, who knows? But you got to give yourself a chance, and they didn't do that. So, I'm not going to say they have themselves to blame. They have a sparkling resume. Their strength of record is tops in the country. This Big 12 conference has 8 bowl teams in it. They don't have the Texas, they don't have the Oklahoma, and maybe that's what it is. If we're in the brand business and you're seeing Ohio State and Alabama sitting on the outside, maybe that's what happens. But ultimately, I think on Sunday morning that TCU is going to get the nod.
And if you really want to get the spin machine going, Jeff, you could say that TCU's regular season win over Kansas State will now be a win over a probably top 8 team in the country. So that's one way Frog fans can spin it, maybe help keep those emotions in check over the next 12 to 24 hours as we wait for the College Football Playoff Committee to make their final decision and see whether or not TCU ends up in the top 4. Brian?
There you have it, folks. Insight into what happens next for the Horned Frogs. Again, we find out tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. That's when we'll know where the Frogs are headed for postseason. A lot of football left. All right, don't put your gear away just yet, because the Frogs still have a lot to play for, a lot of hopes too, as well as send Max Duggan and this group out in style as well for this season. All right, for our entire crew here at Frogs Today, for Jamie Plunkett, Jeff Wilson, Coach David Bowden, for Maggie Hill, everyone else here at Frogs Today and FrogsToday.com. Thanks for joining us. Final score here, 31-28. Frogs fall in overtime in a Big 12 championship game to Kansas State. I'm Brian Estridge. We'll see you soon.